Welcome back, everyone. So here we are inside of the Create React App documents, and we're looking at specifically their adding TypeScript section. The reason why we want to read this section is because Create React App under the hood has actually already configured their Webpack and also some additional configurations when they set up the project for us with Create React App so that it can actually support TypeScript pretty easily. You can actually spin up your instance of Create React App application with TypeScript by default by using a -- template TypeScript. For us, though, we initialized our application without TypeScript because we wanted to be able to write our code without thinking about TypeScript first. We had to learn React, but now we're ready to learn TypeScript, and specifically TypeScript in React. So if you scroll down here, you'll actually find a section where it's adding TypeScript to an existing React project. So what we're going to do is we are going to copy this entire thing. So the reason we want this is because there are a bunch of different libraries that we need to install in order for TypeScript to run. So here, what we're going to do is we're going to go back into our terminal, and inside your Monsters-Rolodex project, I want you to add inside that line that we just copied over, and we're going to install a bunch of these libraries. The other thing that we need to set up is actually a tsconfig file. So TypeScript, as I mentioned, is not necessarily JavaScript. It's like another language, even though it's remarkably similar to JavaScript. So essentially what happens is we need to tell our TypeScript configuration what we want to support. Essentially, this is kind of like us telling TypeScript we want to support React with its types. We also want to tell it that there's a certain version of JavaScript that we want to support. Like, for example, up to certain versions of TypeScript, they don't actually support generators the way that we need it to in order for us to properly type our sagas. So essentially, the tsconfig allows us to configure our TypeScript so that it runs in the version we need it to. Now, normally when you build out your project in TypeScript using the Create React App TypeScript template, it will build out this tsconfig file for you. But because we started without it, we're not going to get that. So what we're going to do is we are going to add in our own tsconfig.json file. And inside what I want you to do is I want you to paste what I'm going to give you. Now, this is essentially the exact file that's going to get generated for you when you build your project in TypeScript. So when you run Create React App with the template and the generate tsconfig file, we're really just pasting that one over. So that's what I want you to do. I want you to go into your resource folder, find the tsconfig file, copy it, and paste it in. It's literally just the exact same file because it comes with what we need it to have. So once we have in our tsconfig file, we can start migrating our code over to TypeScript. And to do that, what we need to do is actually change these files from JSX and .js over to .ts or .tsx. The .ts essentially stands for TypeScript. And the way that we're going to start migrating is we're going to start thinking about it in isolation. So the easiest way for me to teach you TypeScript is to begin by typing some of the more basic parts of the application. And then as we grow, we'll discuss more, think about more types, think about more of a strategy of migrating an application over to TypeScript. Honestly, there's a lot to discuss, but we have a great way forward. So the best place to begin is for us to just start with our search box. The search box component is a simple component. Now, in order for us to start typing this file, we need to convert it from a JS file over to a TS file. If it's JSX, then it's TSX. If it's JS, then it's TS. So TSX is a JX file, except instead it's in TypeScript. If you look down here, it says TypeScript React, which is what we want it to be. The moment you switch it over, you'll notice that the VS Code compiler is going to throw some errors because this is invalid TypeScript. If you hover over it, you see binding element class name implicitly has an any type. Now, any is a special keyword. Inside of TypeScript, any means that it can be anything at all. Any possible type can be passed as an argument. Now, if any type can be passed, then automatically this defeats the purpose of using TypeScript because we want to implicitly or explicitly know what types are being passed through or cast as these variables. So this is a very important thing to remember. You never want to use any. In fact, it's probably the #1 golden rule in TypeScript. Never use the any keyword. In fact, if any type is any, you want to figure out there's probably some kind of strategy to tie this to some type of type. There are even cases where you have no idea what you're getting, but there's actually another type you can assign to that is more type safe than any. But the key thing, almost 99.9% of the time, you will never use any. Now, before we start typing these parameters, let's talk about typing in general and how that works. I'm going to create a variable called name. If I wanted to type this name and say that this is always going to hold a string value, the way that we type this is we use a colon. Following the colon, we then define the type. So here I'm going to say it's going to be a string. Now you want to use these lowercase primitive types. Typically inside of JavaScript, you're probably used to seeing capitalized string. You want to use the lowercase value because this is a specific type we get from TypeScript representing the actual primitive. You have the string, you have booleans, you have numbers, and you have the arrays, the objects, as well as the functions, but those are more specific and we'll discuss those after. We're just going to start with basic types for now. With string, if you set it to string, you'll notice now that when you hover over this variable, in that first line, it says const name is string. So right now, TypeScript's compiler knows, oh, this value has been cast to a string, even though we haven't assigned the value yet. Now what we can do is if we assign it a value of string, then what we notice is simply that it's declared, but it's never used. So this is a warning, but it's not an error. What happens though, if you were to assign this a value that is not matching of the type, like a number? If you hover over it now, in that third line, you'll see type number is not assignable to type string. So JavaScript's compiler now knows, oh, this value you're trying to assign to me is a number, but this doesn't match the type that has been explicitly stated to this value of name. And now it will throw an error. Now, as we advance, this will get more complex, especially when we need to actually define the types for objects and for arrays, which is what we'll discuss in the next video. For now, all we need to know is that once we've installed TypeScript and you want to convert a file over to TypeScript, convert the file extension to ts or .tsx. And then for the actual values, if you want to assign them to some kind of type, you must use the colon. And we've learned a little bit also about how the TypeScript compiler inside of VS Code helps us realize that we're throwing type errors. So with that, let's move on to the next video.